Welcome to the Common Weal Policy Podcast with me, Jonathon Shafi, the Campaigns Officer here at Common Weal. I'm joined this week by Dr. Craig Dalzell, who's the Head of Policy and Research at the think tank and has been busy as ever. But before we get into the detail of today's discussion, how are you getting on, Craig, and how are you viewing the weeks coming ahead as we go into winter?
I'm doing as well as always. Hope you're doing okay yourself, Shafi.
Aye, not bad. Well, I suppose this podcast is going to focus on one of our wins, one of the policies which Common Weal pioneered and which this week has been brought into being. And of course, I'm talking about the Scottish National Investment Bank. Now, Common Weal has been involved in the policy work around that, in the campaigning around it, and we thought it would be good and we thought it would be useful for listeners of this podcast to get an overall appreciation of that process. So we're going to start with that. And Craig, I just invite you to just give our listeners a bit of an outline, a history of how this came into being.
Yeah, so this is something that has been one of Common Weal's biggest campaigns. It's certainly our biggest policy win so far, hopefully. We'll break that record sooner or later. But it's one that's been going on since actually before I joined Common Weal as a full-time staff member. I joined in November 2016, but this goes a fair wee bit before that. The first paper the principles of this kind of patient investing goes right back to our founding manifesto in 2014. But in March 2016, we published a paper by Gemma Bowen on the need for banking for the common good, and that laid out a lot of the principles of why we need this kind of banking in Scotland and what's happened to our economy because we don't have it, because we've just got the more free market neoliberal type banking that the UK enjoys. In October 2016, we then followed that up with a blueprint paper written primarily by Laurie McFarlane, who was then working for the NEF. It was a joint project between Common Weal and the New Economics Foundation. And that kind of kick-started our campaign, because now we didn't just have a principle, we had a roadmap. We had an instruction book on how to actually form an investment bank. And we took it to the Scottish Government, and to our shock, they knocked it back. They simply said, we are not interested in doing this. There was no discussion, and there was to be no discussion. That was it. That was the end of the road. But we kept pushing. We then took the paper to a lot of the civil servants who would be working on a policy like this, and they said that they liked it. There was a need for it, and it was possible. We also took it to the various other political parties and to the members of the SNP, and just about everyone we found there was really enthusiastic about the paper as well. It all started to build a bit of steam. In spring 2017, it came up at the SNP conference. There was a lively debate, quite a long debate, quite a detailed debate about it, and the policy ended up passing through that conference unanimously. If anyone knows party conferences, they know how rare that is. Overwhelming votes, yes, but an actual unanimous vote is a very rare and celebrated thing. Of course, going from party policy to the policy of government takes time as well. But with the civil servants saying it was possible, with the party members saying that it was desirable, that they wanted it, and also with a bit of additional pressure coming in the form of Jeremy Corbyn and his Labour Party at the time picking up the idea as well. Listeners might remember around that time, the Labour Party, the UK Labour Party, started talking about a network of national investment banks and regional investment banks across the country, including in Scotland, and that model was essentially taken from us and scaled up. So the Scottish Government now had all the pieces around them saying that we want it, we need it, and if you don't do it, someone else will. So they took the policy on. and started the consultation process and started the deliberation process. We were invited to play a really key and central role to that process. A lot of meetings with the team that was starting to build the bank and pushing out ideas. We also met with parliamentary committees. We have videos online of especially of our director Robin presenting evidence to Parliament on what it would mean, what the bank should do, and here we are. 3 years after that, the bank has now formally launched and has, while there's still a few things to do around the setting of the missions that it's going to be following, and a few other things embedding in it. It has now announced its first investment projects, and yeah, we can talk about what the actual bank is, why it is structured the way it is, if you like. But it's really a textbook lesson in political campaigning. I often say that in politics, everything is impossible until it becomes inevitable, and this really was one of those policies that was just flatly pushed back, and we were told it's impossible, you're not going to win this, and until we did, and now it's here. It's really exciting to see what it's going to do for Scotland in the years, decades to come.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I think that's right. I mean, first of all, I think that was a very good overview of how this process unravelled. But also, just in your last point there about a kind of textbook lesson in campaigning. I mean, it's no surprise to me, I have to say, that the Scottish Government initially just rejected the idea outright, though why they did that and didn't see the merit in it is for others to consider. But what we can say is that the combination of Common Weal doing the policy work and of SNP members, of grassroots activists within the party, making sure that it got to conference and then delivering that unanimous vote in favour of the Scottish National Investment Bank, then that does show that the combination of both policy and organising in the party structure can bring about some real progress. Now, before we get on and talk about the situation that the bank is presently in, and what we want to see happen around it, and why this campaign really isn't over, I just like to ask, given that this has happened with the National Investment Bank, initially rejected but then pushed through, do you think that provides the basis for a kind of framework for how we can get other issues going through the party of government and then eventually becoming policy? I mean, do you see this as being something we could emulate in other areas?
Well, we learned a lot of lessons in political campaigning through fighting for the SNIB. We definitely found that combination of permission from civil servants and from other stakeholders and architects, if you will, of these policies, plus the grassroots push, either from party members or from the general public, is what really helped in getting these policies through. We've emulated that model in other areas. We use it as part of our campaign to help ban fracking, for instance. We've also used it to get other policies passed around our other infrastructure type projects, like our National Infrastructure Company, our National Energy Company, the Scottish Statistics Agency, and other things that have passed through party conference, albeit either haven't quite made it onto government policy book yet, or are in the early stages of that process. The SNIB of all our major policy successes so far, the SNIB, the one that's reached launch first. But that idea, I mean, we've also used that idea in other areas. We've helped other campaign groups use that to forward their ideas, and we've talked about several of them on the podcast in previous episodes.
I mean, I'm going to just take this opportunity, and I don't normally do this in the middle of the podcast, but I mean, if you're listening to this and you see the obvious need for this kind of work to be done, then you can't really look any further in Scotland than Common Weal. So if you're not already someone who can donate towards us, or who gives us a monthly donation, then please consider that, because every penny that you donate, given that we're only funded by individual donors like the people who listen to this podcast, they do. Every penny goes towards this kind of work, and it brings about real and concrete results. So well done to everyone who's been involved in this, from the grassroots members to the policy writers and to the think tank in general. It's something to really be celebrated. With that said, though, I also want to look at some of the difficulties that emerge here as well. And I know there's a number of areas where we want to maintain scrutiny. We want to sustain our kind of campaign around reaching the full potential of the SNIB. So I wonder if you could just start us off in that conversation, Craig. If you could just sort of tell us some of the ways in which you feel the potential for this can be reached, and some of the barriers to that as it presently stands.
Well, to do that, we need to understand what the SNIB is and why it's different from other investment funds and that exist in Scotland. One of the issues we identified in our blueprint paper was there are quite a lot of grant bodies and loan bodies in Scotland. They're often quite small. They often have shifting criteria about how they dole out their money. And if you have a fairly substantial project, it's not always possible to get all of the money you need for that project from one source. If you go into the commercial sector, if you go to the retail banks, you can, but you then go into the area where these banks are driven primarily by profit, and they want their money back. Sometimes they want their money back faster than is comfortable for you as a company. Sometimes they set targets over percentage growth rates in the project, which might not be suitable. It can lead to things like pump and dump schemes, where you push growth, and then the whole thing collapses around you, and the investors make off with the money, but you're left with the wreckage. So the purpose of the SNIB is to bring in a philosophy of patient finance, one that isn't motivated by getting a return on the investment within a couple of years and then abandoning you to the market. It's about helping the project go, supporting it for as long as it needs to be supported. At a scale that allows projects to get the money they need without having to go to a half dozen smaller funds. The other major thing is the SNIB is, as I mentioned before, mission directed. So the Scottish Government will be able to set missions that the bank can then judge its investing opportunities on, which projects it takes on. And these missions will change over time. Right now, the biggest thing that is facing us is the climate emergency. So it's no surprise that a lot of the missions that are being set for the bank at the moment deal with that. So it's things like decarbonising Scotland's economy. It's things like providing better housing. There's potential for developing different ways of funding renewable energy projects. But we see the SNIB not as a thing for a parliamentary term or even a couple of decades. Once we have fixed the climate emergency and we're looking towards the next century, the SNIB should be there to be able to deal with the missions that face our country then. So it's quite a far-sighted project in that way. This isn't something that will be that hopefully will. This is something that will be with Scotland for a long time. We do have banks in Scotland that have hundreds of years of history, and we hope that in time the SNIB will be able to join them. But you're right, there have been some issues developing up in how the SNIB has been formed, and some of the structures that have been put in place that deviate somewhat from our vision. And it's understandable because you have a lot more stakeholders than just us involved in creating it. And you have the political dimension, you've got other points of view. No single person has got everything they want out of the SNIB. but there are areas that we want to campaign on to help improve it and to help it deliver its missions in a more effective way.
And after giving that kind of just a kind of briefing, I suppose, for listeners on the way the SNIB can operate, just now give us some ideas then of what are those limitations, do you think? What are the kind of things that you want to see Common Weal and others continue to campaign around when it comes to the National Investment Bank?
Well, probably the first one is that it can't be something that is just limited to the financial world. Now, I do understand that big, complex financial institutions need, quite specific skills to be able to run them. And some of the people involved around the SNIB have gone out of the way to say that you need bankers to run a bank, and they might not be entirely wrong there. And there have been some criticisms about the senior people appointed to this bank because of their background in more conventional investment banking. And there's a risk that if those skills bed in, and only those skills bed in, then the SNIB could just become another one of those financialising bodies that could lead Scotland just down the same path as it's gone with other investment vehicles in the past. So we campaigned, we recognise this from an early stage, right back in our blueprint papers. So we campaigned for there to be an advisory body, an advisory board to be attached to the bank, made up of stakeholders from Scottish society, citizens, industry representatives, trade union representatives, third sector representatives, however that stakeholder body is made up. And we wanted that group to advise the bank directly. Now, we didn't quite win that. We did win the advisory group, but the way it's set up right now is the advisory group really will advise the Scottish Government Minister, who will then advise the bank. So there's a bit of distance there between the advisory group and the bank that isn't ideal. We would like to see that advisory group given essentially equal status to the bank's governing board and to the Scottish Government Ministers who will set the missions. That's not to say that the bank will be compelled to follow the advice from anywhere it gets. I mean, it has to operate with some degree of independence, but there will be a stronger link there to let it listen to that advice, unfiltered by political agendas, for instance, because just as we can't allow the bank to fall into the trap of only listening to bankers, we can't allow it to fall into the trap of falling victim to political manipulation as well. Now, so we need to have those safeguards there. Now, we think that the case has already been proven for that. We've seen in Scotland over the past year or so, with the rise of the citizens' assemblies, that the people of Scotland are well placed to take on the responsibility to be able to be on boards like this and to give really good advice. So we think that this is one area of reform that would be really valuable for the SNIB.
No, I think that's really well put, because we've got a lot of, as listeners will no doubt be aware, our thinking when it comes to policy is that there's interlocking features of how our policies would work together. So, for example, the Scottish National Investment Bank, the Scottish National Infrastructure Company, we've been looking at having a national pharmaceutical company, for example. All of these areas of life and of the economy, they interlock, they complement each other, but we also want to see democracy run through them as well. We want to see citizens' involvement. We want these structures to benefit society and to have a relationship with society. So when it comes to the Scottish National Investment Bank, as Craig outlines there, we want to see the involvement of Civic Scotland. We want to see the involvement of citizens, of unions, of a range of groups and organisations. So that's something we'll be continuing to push. We'll be continuing to campaign on. I suppose just coming towards the end of the episode, Craig, is there anything that you would like to see SNIB dedicate resources to? Is there any area of either Scottish public life or any issue that you think that we are contending with at the present moment that you feel would benefit from this kind of investment bank? I mean, I suppose the obvious issue is is matters arising around climate change and around green jobs and that sort of stuff. And we've just come off the back of the kind of disastrous news coming out of BIFAB. And I just wondered, do you see any parallels that could be drawn, any areas of synergy between these issues?
Right. So one of the things that the bank is really pushing is patient investment in small and medium companies. And actually, the very first piece of investment announced is to one of these companies. Is actually to the company I worked for before I got into politics, M Squared Lasers, back in my laser days. That was a bit of a surprise to hear. So if any of my old colleagues are listening in on the podcast, hi, and that's what I've been up to for the past few years. And investment in SMEs is going to be a core part of the bank, but it shouldn't be the sole mission. It shouldn't be the sole area of investment. We've called for the bank to really look broadly when it comes to fulfilling its missions. So one thing we have called for, and we have an extensive blueprint policy paper on this, is how the SNIB could be potentially used to build zero carbon, Green New Deal compliant houses for public rent. Then the advantages of this, well, if people who get one of these houses get an absolutely top class house, don't need to worry about heating bills, and have a house that's future proofed for the climate emergency. But the rent that comes back from that house, from the tenants, will go to paying back the finance used to build them, and then go and provide a really stable part of the bank's portfolio. Similar with things like renewable energy. We all need energy, which means that investment in renewable energy is an extremely stable and low risk form of investment. Once the project is up and running, it will just generate income. By diversifying the portfolio that way, that allows the bank to take on slightly riskier projects, like maybe funding expansions in SMEs into ventures that may or may not work. You know, if too many companies do fail after getting investment from the SNIB, and remember they will probably be getting investment that they couldn't get from elsewhere. So it might be talking about slightly riskier projects, or at least projects that require more patience than the retail banking sector would offer. Then if the portfolio is too geared towards those slightly riskier investments, it could be destabilizing for the SNIB. So we need that kind of broad, balanced, stable portfolio that allows it to take on the projects that could be of great benefit, but might involve a little more risk.
Well, there's certainly a lot of big issues that we've got to tackle. It's been a fantastic development to see the opening of SNIB, and it's been all to the good that Common Weal has played such a positive role within that. We wanted to focus, obviously, the episode on that, but there also has been another very good development coming out of the Scottish Parliament this week among the general gloom, and that is the piece of legislation that's been passed through the Parliament that is opening the door to free sanitary products, and for the campaign around that to be met with a full victory, led by Monica Lennon and others. The bill to make period poverty history is something which is really impressive, and something which will bring about concrete gains for women and girls in their daily lives. And Craig, this is something we at Common Weal very much welcome, and very much congratulate everyone who's been involved in that work.
And again, this is something that once it got to Parliament, it was just such an obviously good policy that it passed unanimously. Just as at conference, unanimous victories at Parliament are a rare thing, and it's even rarer talk about them when they've been initiated by an opposition MSP. So massive congratulations to everybody involved in that campaign.
And if people want to just see the response and find out more information, the hashtags that are being used are hashtag period dignity, hashtag period poverty, and hashtag free period products. Some good news this week. We've got a lot to do, though we have serious challenges coming down the line, as everyone knows. We are engaged, Craig and I, in lots of meetings going on behind the scenes. We are planning, as we've mentioned previously on this podcast, we're planning for next year a very substantial campaign around the Resilient Scotland papers, and we'll be taking that to every town and city across Scotland, and we really want to make a big impact. We want to do what we did with SNIB, but we want to do it even bigger and with more impact. So we will be focused on that, and with that, we will be back next week, and we look forward to you tuning in again then.